She texted a number that hadn't worked in 15 years. The Korean Mafia boss, who still owned it, replied, "Stay exactly where you are." Ruth Martinez's breath came in shallow gasps as she crouched in the basement corner, her phone clutched against her chest like a talisman. Upstairs, Brian's footsteps moved with methodical purpose, the sound of a man who knew the house was his domain and she had nowhere left to run. Her fingers found the old contact buried deep in her phone. Tae-sung. The name she'd never deleted even after the number stopped working, even after he vanished from the neighborhood without explanation when they were 17. The boy who'd walked her home every night. The boy who'd promised her something she'd been too young to understand. Brian's voice drifted down the stairs, deceptively calm. "Ruth, sweetheart, this is getting embarrassing. You know I can't let you leave looking like that. What would people think?" What would people think? He'd used those exact words when he'd grabbed her face hard enough to leave fingerprints on her jaw, when he'd locked the bedroom door from the outside for her own good, when he'd systematically isolated her from everyone who might notice the woman she was becoming, or rather, the woman she was disappearing into. The basement door creaked open at the top of the stairs. Ruth's thumb moved across the screen, muscle memory taking over rational thought. She typed into the void, into a number that probably belonged to a stranger now, into the last desperate corner of her mind that still believed in childhood promises. "It's Ruth. He's coming. I don't know what he'll do this time. 2847 Ashford Lane. I'm so sorry. I know this number is dead." She hit send and immediately felt foolish. 15 years. Tae-sung could be anywhere. Married, dead, moved on to a life where girls from the old neighborhood were just faded photographs. The number was probably recycled, handed to some random person who'd think she was insane. Brian's footsteps began descending, each step precise, each step bringing him closer. Her phone vibrated. "Don't move a muscle. Lock whatever door you're behind. I'll be there in 12 minutes. And Ruth, that number was never dead. I was just waiting for you to use it." The breath left her lungs. The phone nearly slipped from her shaking hands. That syntax, that certainty, it was him. Impossibly, it was him. She typed back with trembling fingers. "He's already in the house. 12 minutes might be—" The response came instantly. "Then he has 12 minutes to make peace with his God. Stay hidden. Don't let him see you until I arrive. The man who walks out of your house tonight won't be your husband anymore." 10 minutes. Welcome to Silent Speaks Story, where silence isn't empty, it's loaded. If you've been riding with me, you already know. We tell the stories that polite society whispers about behind the door.
Closed doors. The ones where love doesn't ask permission, where power isn't given, but taken, where the most dangerous promises are the ones whispered in childhood and sealed in blood 15 years later. And if you're new here, you just found your addiction. Because at Silent Speaks Story, we don't do surface-level romance. We go deep into the psychology, the obsession, the moment when a protector becomes a predator and the prey discovers she has teeth. Hit that like button if you're ready to see what happens when silence breaks. Subscribe because once you hear these stories, you'll crave them like oxygen. And turn on notifications because when silence speaks, you don't want to miss a single word. Now let's watch how a childhood vow became a blood oath and how the ruthless Korean mafia boss finally came to collect what was always his.
The front door didn't break, it simply opened, as if the lock had been expecting him. Ruth heard it from the basement, the soft click that meant someone had entered her prison without force, without hesitation. Brian heard it too. His head snapped toward the stairs, confusion flickering across his face before he could smooth it into the mask of concerned husband. "Ruth, did you give someone a key?" His voice carried that dangerous edge wrapped in silk. Footsteps descended, not rushed, not cautious, the kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who'd already decided how this would end. Tae-sang appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and Ruth's breath caught. 15 years had carved the boy she remembered into something else entirely. He wore a camel coat that probably cost more than her car, tailored to shoulders that had grown broader, harder. His face had lost its softness, but kept its beauty. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that swept the basement until they found her huddled behind the water heater. Those eyes softened for exactly 1 second. Then they slid to Brian and went cold as winter steel. "You must be the husband." Tae-sung's English carried the barest trace of an accent, refined and dangerous. "You have 30 seconds to explain why my woman is hiding in a basement." "Your woman?" Brian laughed, but Ruth heard the calculation in it. He was measuring this stranger, deciding if he could talk his way through. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my house, that's my wife, and you're trespassing." 20 seconds. Brian's jaw tightened. "Ruth, baby, who is this? Some old boyfriend you called to make me jealous? Because this is really—" Tae-sung moved. One moment he was at the base of the stairs, the next his hand was around Brian's throat, lifting him onto his toes with terrifying ease. Brian's eyes bulged, his hands clawed at Tae-sung's wrist, but it might as well have been steel. "Let me clarify something," Tae-sung said quietly, his voice never rising above conversational. "You are standing in a house that belongs to a man who put his hands on Ruth Martinez. That man is about to stop existing. Your marriage is over. Your life as you know it is over. The only question is whether you leave here on your feet or in pieces." Brian made a strangled sound. Tae-sung's grip didn't loosen. "Nod if you understand that every second you remain in her presence is borrowed time." Brian nodded frantically. Tae-sung released him. Brian collapsed against the wall, gasping, his carefully maintained composure shattered like the lock he'd been about to break. Tae-sung turned to Ruth, and his expression transformed. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to find words. He crossed to her in 3 strides, crouching to her level, his coat pooling around him like dragon wings. Up close, she could see the man he'd become, dangerous, powerful, exactly what he'd promised he'd be. "Then let's go home," he said softly, extending his hand. "I've kept your room ready for 15 years." Ruth took his hand. It was warm, solid, real. He pulled her to her feet and tucked her against his side, positioning himself between her and Brian like a wall of flesh and bone. Brian found his voice, desperate now. "You can't just take her. I'll call the police. You'll do nothing." Tae-sung's voice dropped to a whisper that filled the entire basement. "Because if I hear your name, see your face, or learn you've breathed in Ruth's direction, I will dismantle your life brick by brick. Your business, your reputation, your precious clean image, I'll burn it all and scatter the ashes. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Brian understood. Ruth could see it in the way he shrank back, in the way his hands trembled. He'd finally met something he couldn't manipulate or control. Tae-sung guided Ruth toward the stairs. At the top, he paused and looked back at Brian one last time. "The marriage is over. If you're smart, you'll sign whatever papers arrive. If you're not, well, then I get to have some fun." They walked out into the night, leaving Brian alone in the basement where he'd cornered his last victim. The car was black, sleek, and utterly silent. Ruth sank into leather seats that probably cost more than everything she owned. Tae-sung slid in beside her, and the door closed with a whisper that felt like a coffin ceiling.
She should have been relieved. She was out. She was safe. But as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a different kind of fear began to crystallize in her chest. "Where are we going?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Home." He didn't look at her. His fingers moved across his phone screen with practiced efficiency, typing in what looked like Korean. The blue light cast shadows across his face, making him look carved from stone. Home. He'd said that word twice now, like it meant something specific, like she should understand. The drive took 20 minutes. They left the modest neighborhood where she'd lived with Brian, crossed through downtown, and climbed into the hills where the city's real power resided. When they finally stopped, Ruth's breath caught. The estate sprawled before them like something from a fever dream. Glass and steel and stone, all sharp angles and impossible architecture. Walls surrounded it, not decorative walls, but the kind that said, "Keep out or die." Guards stood at intervals, earpieces glinting in the security lights. One of them nodded to Tae-sung with something that looked like reverence. Or fear. "Tae-sung," Ruth whispered as they walked through the entrance, her shoes clicking on marble that reflected the chandelier overhead like a frozen galaxy. "What do you do?" He finally looked at her. "I protect what's mine." It wasn't an answer, it was a warning dressed in devotion. He led her through hallways that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was beautiful and cold and perfect. She saw men in suits pause as they passed, bowing slightly, their eyes carefully averted. She saw a room through an open door where screens showed security feeds from what looked like half the city. She saw a woman in the corner of another room cleaning a stain off the floor that looked too dark to be wine. Ruth's stomach turned. They stopped at a door near the end of a long corridor. Tae-sung opened it, revealing a bedroom that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A bed large enough for royalty sat in the center, covered in white silk. And on the nightstand, Ruth's legs nearly gave out. Her childhood teddy bear, the one she'd left behind when her family moved across town 15 years ago, the one she thought she'd lost forever. It sat there, carefully preserved, waiting. "You kept it," she breathed. "I kept everything." Tae-sung stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating off him, the barely contained intensity. His hand lifted, fingers ghosting along her jaw where Brian's fingerprints had faded to yellow-green bruises. The touch was gentle, reverent, but his eyes held something that made her pulse spike. "Do you know what I've built here, Ruth?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "An empire, built on blood and fear and absolute control. I became a king so that no one could ever touch you again, so that when you finally needed me, I would be strong enough to burn down anyone who hurt you." Ruth's breath came shallow. "You're talking about the Mafia. You're a crime lord?" "I'm a man who keeps his promises." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The boy you knew died the night I left. I killed him so that this version could exist. The version that makes men like Brian shake. The version that can keep you in a fortress of glass and gold and make the whole world bleed if they try to reach you." He stepped back, and the loss of his warmth felt like abandonment. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we plan. Brian thinks he has power." Tae-sung's smile was all teeth and darkness. "He's about to learn what real power looks like." The door closed behind him, and Ruth stood alone in her golden cage, staring at the teddy bear that proved she'd never really escaped at all. She'd just traded one prison for another, except this time her captor had been waiting 15 years to claim her. Ruth couldn't sleep. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city breathe below, and let herself remember the night everything changed. 15 years ago, she was 17, sitting on the rusted swing set behind the apartment complex, where both their families barely survived. Tae-sung had found her there at midnight.
her face puffy from crying, her lip split where her father's backhand had caught her for staying out past curfew. He'd said nothing, just sat on the swing next to her, his own knuckles raw and bleeding from whatever fight he'd gotten into that week. They'd been doing this dance for 3 years, finding each other in the wreckage, not talking about the bruises, just existing in the quiet understanding that some homes were battlegrounds. "I'm leaving tonight." His voice had been soft, almost lost in the wind. Ruth's heart had cracked. "Where?" "Somewhere I can get strong." He'd turned to look at her then, his face still holding that boyish softness that 15 years would carve away. "My uncle in Seoul, he has connections. He says he can teach me things, make me into something." "Something like what?" Taesung's jaw had tightened. "Something that doesn't hide, something that fights back." Ruth had understood. They both came from fathers who ruled with. Ruth couldn't sleep. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city breathe below, and let herself remember the night everything changed. 15 years ago, she was 17, sitting on the rusted swing set behind the apartment complex, where both their families barely survived. Taesung had found her there at midnight, her face puffy from crying, her lip split where her father's backhand had caught her for staying out past curfew. He'd said nothing, just sat on the swing next to her, his own knuckles raw and bleeding from whatever fight he'd gotten into that week. They'd been doing this dance for 3 years, finding each other in the wreckage, not talking about the bruises, just existing in the quiet understanding that some homes were battlegrounds. "I'm leaving tonight." His voice had been soft, almost lost in the wind. Ruth's heart had cracked. "Where?" "Somewhere I can get strong." He'd turned to look at her then, his face still holding that boyish softness that 15 years would carve away. "My uncle in Seoul, he has connections. He says he can teach me things, make me into something." "Something like what?" Taesung's jaw had tightened. "Something that doesn't hide, something that fights back." Ruth had understood. They both came from fathers who ruled with fists, from neighborhoods where weakness was punished and strength was the only currency that mattered. She'd seen it in his eyes for months, the hunger for power, the desperate need to become untouchable. "How long?" she'd whispered. "However long it takes." He'd stood, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a cheap phone. "I'm leaving this number active, just this one. Nobody else will have it. When you need me, when you really need me, you call and I'll come. I don't care if it's a year, or 10 years, or 50. "Taesung, let me finish." He'd knelt in front of her swing, eye level, and the intensity in his gaze had stolen her breath. "I'm going to get strong enough so that no one can touch us. Not our fathers, not anyone. I'm going to build something so solid that when I come back, I can put you somewhere safe, somewhere beautiful, somewhere no one can hurt you ever again." Tears had spilled down her cheeks. "You're talking about becoming like them, like the men who hurt people." "No." His hand had caught her face, thumb wiping away her tears with devastating gentleness. "I'm talking about becoming worse, because I'll do it for the right reasons. I'll become a monster so you can stay human." "That's not fair to you." "Nothing about our lives is fair, Ruth." He smiled, sad and certain. "But this is my choice. Let me make it. Let me become something strong enough to protect you." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him there had to be another way. But she'd looked at her split lip, at his bleeding knuckles, at the apartment windows above them where her father was probably passed out drunk, and his mother was probably nursing new bruises, and she'd known the truth. Weakness didn't save anyone. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Promise me you won't forget who you really are." Taesung had leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers in a gesture so tender it hurt. "I'm doing this because I know exactly who I am. I'm the boy who loves you enough to become a devil for you." Then he'd kissed her forehead, stood, and walked away into the night. She'd watched him disappear, clutching that phone number like a lifeline, never imagining it would take 15 years and a different monster's basement before she'd finally use it. Never imagining the boy who'd promised to protect her would keep that promise so completely that he'd build her a prison made of devotion. Ruth pressed her palm against the cold glass, staring at her reflection. In the window, she could see the ghost of that 17-year-old girl, crying on a rusty swing, believing in promises. She'd gotten exactly what Taesung had vowed to give her. And now she had to decide if salvation and captivity could be the same thing. Ruth woke to chaos. Voices echoed from somewhere in the estate, sharp and urgent. She pulled on the silk robe someone had left folded on the chair, someone meaning Taesung's people, meaning she was surrounded by an infrastructure designed to anticipate her needs before she knew them herself, and followed the sound. The study doors were open. Inside, Taesung stood before a wall of screens, his jaw carved from granite, while 3 men in suits spoke rapidly in Korean. One of them gestured at a tablet, his face grim. Taesung's eyes flicked to her. "Ruth, you need to see this." She stepped inside, and he turned one of the screens toward her. Her own face stared back, a photo from 2 years ago, smiling at some company dinner Brian had dragged her to. Beneath it, text that made her blood freeze. Amber Alert. Ruth Martinez, 32, believed abducted by armed suspect Taesung Park. Suspect is dangerous and possibly involved in organized crime. If you see this woman, contact authorities immediately. She may be in grave danger. "He called the police," Ruth breathed. He did better than that." Taesung's voice was cold enough to frost glass. He swiped to another screen. Legal documents filled the display. "Emergency restraining order granted at 6 this morning. My assets are frozen pending investigation into suspected human trafficking and racketeering. He's got a judge in his pocket, painting me as a violent criminal who kidnapped his loving wife." One of the suited men spoke in rapid Korean. Taesung's response was clipped, controlled, but Ruth heard the fury beneath it. What did he say? That Brian's media contacts are already running the story. By noon, I'll be the most wanted man in the city. Taesung turned to face her fully. "He's not just coming for me, Ruth. He's coming for everything. My businesses, my reputation, my ability to move freely. He's weaponizing the law." Ruth's hands trembled. "This is my fault. I should never have called you. I should have—" "Stop." Taesung crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with that same devastating gentleness. "This is exactly what I built this empire for. Brian thinks he's clever because he knows how to manipulate systems. He thinks his connections and his clean image make him untouchable." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and his smile turned sharp. "He's about to learn that the law is just another cage, and I've spent 15 years learning how to break cages from the inside." Another man entered, speaking urgently. Taesung listened, his expression darkening. "What?" Ruth whispered. "Your brother. Brian contacted you an hour ago, told me I'd kidnapped you.
Julian is cooperating with the police. Taesung's jaw tightened. He's giving them everything he knows about our childhood, about my uncle in Seoul, building the narrative that I've been obsessed with you for years. He has been, one of the suited men muttered in English. Taesung shot him a look that could cut steel. Ruth's mind raced. Julian would believe Brian. Her little brother had always liked Brian, had been relieved when she married someone stable. He had no idea what Brian really was, and now he was helping build a case that could destroy the one person who'd actually saved her. I can fix this, Ruth said suddenly. I can call Julian. I can tell him the truth. I can go to the police and say what? Taesung's voice was gentle but firm. That your husband abused you, so you called a known criminal to extract you? That you're staying in my home willingly? Ruth, they'll twist that into Stockholm Syndrome before you finish the sentence. Brian's already planted the seeds. He was right. She could see it playing out. The concerned husband, the dangerous foreign criminal, the vulnerable wife who didn't know she was being manipulated. Brian had written the script perfectly. So what do we do? Taesung's smile turned predatory. We stop playing defense. Brian wants to use the law as a weapon. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving with lethal precision. Then we'll use his secrets as ammunition. He's not the only one who knows how to destroy someone's life on paper. He looked at Ruth, and she saw the dragon beneath the man. It's time you learned how to fight back.
The war room, as Taesung's people called it, was nothing like Ruth expected. No weapons, no muscle-bound enforcers, just computers, filing cabinets, and a massive glass table covered in documents that looked disturbingly legal. Sit. Taesung pulled out a chair beside his own. Your education starts now. Ruth sank into the leather, watching as he spread files across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Invoices, bank statements, property records, all bearing Brian's company logo, Martinez Premium Cleaning Services. You lived with him for 4 years, Taesung said, his fingers tracing a routing number. Tell me about his business. He cleans offices, corporate buildings, government facilities, medical centers. Ruth frowned. What does that have to do with everything? Taesung pulled up a spreadsheet on his tablet, sliding it toward her. Look at these numbers. His company made $8 million last year. Does that sound right for a cleaning service with 30 employees? Ruth stared at the figures. She'd never seen Brian's books. He'd kept her away from anything financial, said it would bore her. But even she could see the numbers didn't make sense. It's too much, she whispered. Exactly. Taesung leaned back, satisfaction flickering across his face. Brian doesn't just clean buildings, Ruth. He cleans money. Politicians, businessmen, anyone who needs their dirty cash to look legitimate, they hire his company for premium services that don't exist. He invoices them legally, runs the money through his accounts, and suddenly cocaine profits become cleaning supplies. Ruth's stomach turned. He launders money. Among other things, another file appeared. Photographs of Brian at galas, shaking hands with councilmen, posing with the mayor. He's also their fixer. Someone has a problem, Brian makes it disappear. A scandal, a witness, evidence. He has a network of people who clean more than floors. And you want me to prove it. Ruth's hands clenched on the table edge. How? I don't have access to his accounts anymore. I don't have passwords or... You have something better. Taesung's hand covered hers, warm and solid. You have 4 years of watching, 4 years of being invisible in your own home while he conducted business. Think, Ruth. Where did he take calls he didn't want you to hear? Where did he go when he said he was checking on a job site? What rooms were off limits? Ruth closed her eyes, letting herself remember. The basement. Brian always went to the basement for certain calls, the ones that made his voice drop to that silky register. And his office, not the home office where he did legitimate paperwork, but the storage unit he kept across town.
He'd slipped once, 2 years ago, said he needed to grab something from the unit before catching himself. He has a storage unit, Unit 447 at Secure Space on Marshall Avenue. Her eyes snapped open. He said it was for old files, but he kept the key on him always. Even in the shower, he'd leave it in his wallet on the counter. Taesung's smile was pure predation. That's where he keeps the black book, the real records, the list of everyone he's ever cleaned for. One of his men spoke in Korean. Taesung responded, then turned back to Ruth. We can't get into that unit legally. Brian made sure I'm being watched by every cop in the city. He studied her face, calculating. But you can. You're his wife. You have a legal right to access marital property, and in 48 hours, when you don't turn up dead in a ditch like he's been suggesting, people will start questioning his narrative. You want me to rob my own husband. I want you to take back what he stole, your freedom, your life, your power. That book is leverage, Ruth. It's every secret, every crime, every person Brian has dirt on. With it, we don't just defend ourselves, we own him. Ruth looked at the files spread before her, at the evidence of Brian's double life. She thought about Julian believing his lies, about her face on an Amber Alert, about spending 4 years being erased one day at a time. Teach me, she said quietly. Teach me how to find it. Teach me how to destroy him. Taesung's smile could have lit the city on fire. That's my queen, he murmured, and pulled up a blueprint of the storage facility. Lesson 1. Every lock has a weakness. Let's find Brian's.
The call came at 3 in the morning. Ruth's phone, the old one she'd left behind, the one Taesung's people had retrieved from her house, lit up with Julian's number. She grabbed it before it could ring twice. Jules? Ruth, thank God. Her brother's voice was wrong, too tight, too controlled. I need you to listen carefully. Brian's here. He says if you don't come home in the next hour, he's going to... The phone changed hands. Brian's voice slithered through the speaker, honey over razors. Hello, sweetheart. I hope your kidnapper is treating you well. See, I've been doing some thinking. You want to play games? Fine. But Julian here doesn't deserve to pay for your mistakes. A pause, then Julian's sharp intake of breath in the background. 1 hour, Ruth. Come home, or I'll make sure your baby brother understands exactly what happens to people who help criminals. The line went dead. Ruth's hands didn't shake. That was the first thing she noticed. 2 weeks ago, Brian's voice would have turned her bones to water. Now it just turned her blood to ice. Where does Julian live? Taesung was already moving, pulling on a shoulder holster with practiced efficiency. Riverside Apartments, Building C, 4th floor. Ruth stood, shedding the silk robe for the tactical clothing someone had left on her chair. Black pants, fitted jacket, boots that felt more like weapons than shoes. I'm coming with you. Taesung. He's my brother. She met Taesung's eyes, unflinching. And you said I needed to learn, so teach me. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or hunger. He nodded once, then opened a drawer and pulled out something small and black. Taser. 15-foot range. Aim for center mass, hold the trigger for 3 seconds minimum. He pressed it into her palm. Brian's expecting you to come alone, desperate, ready to bargain. He's not expecting what you've become. 20 minutes later, they stood outside Julian's door. Taesung's men had already disabled the building's security cameras. Ruth could hear voices inside. Brian's smooth reassurances, Julian's tense responses. Taesung's hand found her shoulder. I'll go in first, you follow. When I give the signal... No. Ruth's voice was steady. I go in first. He needs to see me, needs to think he's won. Taesung studied her for 3 heartbeats, then stepped aside.
The moment you feel unsafe, I'll tase him until he pisses himself. Ruth's smile felt like a stranger's face. I learned from the best, remember? She knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened and Brian stood there, perfectly composed in his tailored suit, Julian visible behind him, with fear written across his face. Ruth. Brian's smile was warm, concerned, everything the cameras would want to see. Thank God you came to your senses. I knew that man had confused you, but... Ruth's taser hit him in the chest before he finished the sentence. His body convulsed, that smooth mask shattering into shock and pain. She held the trigger exactly as Tae-sung had taught her, counting 3 seconds while Brian collapsed to his knees. But Brian was faster than she expected. The moment she released the trigger, he rolled backward, scrambling for the fire escape. "Let him go," Tae-sung said, even as his men moved to pursue. He was looking at Ruth, at the taser still steady in her hand, at the cold satisfaction in her eyes. "You proved your point, and now he knows you're not afraid anymore." Ruth watched Brian disappear into the night, limping but free. She should have felt frustrated. Instead, she felt powerful. She'd hurt him, made him run, made him fear. Julian stared at her like she was a stranger. Maybe she was. "Ruth, what the hell is going on?" Her brother's voice cracked. "Brian said that man kidnapped you, that you were in danger, but you just..." "Brian broke my arm, Jules." Ruth's voice was steady, factual. "He locked me in our house. He was going to do worse. Tae-sung saved me. Everything Brian told you was a lie." She watched her brother process this, saw the moment belief shifted in his eyes. Tae-sung's hand found the small of her back, proud and possessive. "We need to move. Brian will regroup fast." Ruth nodded, then looked at Julian. "Stay away from him. If he contacts you again, call me immediately. He's dangerous and he's desperate." As they left, Ruth felt something settle in her chest. She'd faced Brian and won, not by being rescued, but by fighting back. And next time, he wouldn't get away.
Brian's escape changed everything. He was wounded, humiliated, but still free to operate. Within hours, his narrative shifted. Now, Ruth was clearly unstable, brainwashed by her captor, attacking her own husband. Ruth didn't care. She had work to do. It came to her at dawn, standing in Tae-sung's office with coffee she couldn't taste. A memory from 3 years ago, so mundane she'd almost lost it. Brian, drunk after a client dinner, fumbling with his wallet. A small key falling out. Her picking it up, asking what it was for. "The unit," he'd slurred, "where I keep the insurance policy. The book that keeps us safe." She'd thought he meant insurance documents. She'd been so stupid then. "Unit 447, she told Tae-sung. "But there's more. He keeps a second key in his office safe at home. The combination is my birthday. He thought that was romantic." Tae-sung's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Then let's go shopping." They hit the house first. Brian's people were likely regrouping, planning their next move. Ruth walked through the front door like she owned it, which legally she did. The house was empty. Brian hadn't dared return after the previous night's humiliation. The safe opened with 4 clicks. Inside, beneath insurance papers and mortgage documents, was a small black ledger and a USB drive. "Got it," Ruth whispered, holding up her prize. Tae-sung moved through the house with practiced efficiency, his men securing exits, checking for surveillance. "Good. Now the unit before he realizes what we're doing." The storage facility was easier. Ruth's name was still on the rental agreement. Brian had never bothered to remove her, probably because he'd never imagined she'd have the spine to use it. Unit 447 opened with both keys, revealing filing cabinets that held the kind of documentation that ended careers and started federal investigations. Client lists, payment records, photographs of politicians with envelopes of cash, audio recordings of threats.
a complete record of every dirty transaction Brian had ever orchestrated, kept as insurance against the very people he served. Ruth photographed everything with the camera Tae-sung had given her, every page, every name, every damning detail. Then she loaded the physical files into the car Tae-sung's people had waiting. By the time Brian realized what was happening, it was already too late. Back at the estate, Tae-sung spread the evidence across his war room table like treasure from a conquered kingdom. Ruth stood beside him, watching names she recognized from television, from the city council meetings, from the society pages. "This is enough to destroy half the city's leadership," Tae-sung murmured. Brian wasn't just laundering money, he was building an empire of blackmail. And now it's ours. Ruth's finger traced a photograph of the mayor accepting an envelope from Brian. Every person in this book is someone who'll do anything to keep it hidden. Brian's power was never his own. It was borrowed from their fear. So, what do you want to do with it? Ruth looked at him, at the man who'd spent 15 years becoming strong enough to protect her, who'd built an empire of blood so she could have a fortress of glass. She thought about the girl on the swing set, crying over a split lip, about the woman hiding in a basement texting a dead number, about the queen she was becoming. Brian's receiving the Humanitarian of the Year award next week. City gala, televised broadcast, everyone who matters will be there. Her smile was all teeth. "I think it's time I made a public appearance, show the city I'm alive and well and very, very angry." Tae-sung's laugh was dark and delighted. "You want to burn him in front of everyone. I want to burn them all." Ruth picked up the black book, feeling its weight like a crown. Brian thought keeping secrets made him powerful. Let's show him what happens when the secrets come out to play. The Grand Palladian Hotel glittered like a jewelry box, every window blazing with light, every surface polished to mirror brightness. Ruth stood outside the gala entrance, and for a moment she let herself be afraid. Then Tae-sung's hand found her lower back, warm and solid, and the fear crystallized into something sharper. "Ready?" he murmured. Ruth looked down at herself, the blood-red gown that clung like armor, the diamond necklace that Tae-sung had clasped around her throat an hour ago with hands that trembled slightly, the heels that made her tall enough to look most men in the eye. Her hair fell in dark waves down her back. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like money and power and barely contained rage. She looked like a queen. "Let's end this." They walked in together, and the room fell silent in spreading waves. Ruth felt every eye track her movement, heard the whispers start like wind through grass. There she is, the missing wife. With him, the man who supposedly kidnapped her. Brian stood at the front of the ballroom beside the mayor, mid-speech about his company's charitable work. He saw her, and his face went sheet white. His hand went instinctively to his ribs where the taser had left its mark, a reminder of the last time he'd underestimated her. Ruth smiled. She walked through the crowd like Moses through the Red Sea, people parting before her, Tae-sung a dark shadow at her side. She walked past councilmen whose faces appeared in the black book, past businessmen who'd paid Brian to make problems disappear, past the police chief who'd helped freeze Tae-sung's assets. She walked straight to the stage. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding." Brian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You see, my husband has been telling people I was kidnapped, that I'm in danger, that I need rescuing." Ruth's smile widened. "But the only person I've ever needed rescuing from is standing right here, about to accept an award for humanitarian work." "Brian." Brian found his voice, smooth as oil, concerned husband perfect for the cameras. "Sweetheart, you're clearly confused. You've been through trauma. Let me help you." "Help me?" Ruth pulled out her phone, connecting it to the ballroom's projection system with the adapter Tae-sung's tech expert had prepared.
The way you helped me by breaking my arm, by locking me in our house, by threatening my brother? The massive screens on either side of the stage lit up. The black book's contents, page by photographed page, began scrolling for the entire gala to see. Or maybe you mean help, like you helped Mayor Chen here. Ruth gestured to the screen, where a photo showed the mayor accepting cash from Brian, or Councilman Rodriguez, or Police Chief Morrison, or any of the 24 other officials you've been cleaning money for and blackmailing for the past decade. The room erupted, voices rising, people moving, someone shouting for security. But Ruth wasn't done. "My husband isn't a humanitarian," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "He's a criminal who weaponized charity as a cover for money laundering, blackmail, and corruption. And I have every receipt, every recording, every piece of evidence to prove it." Brian lunged for her. Tae-sung moved like water, intercepting him, one hand around Brian's throat, lifting him onto his toes. "The marriage is over," Tae-sung said softly, for only Brian to hear. "And if you ever breathe her name again, they'll never find enough of you to bury." Federal agents flooded through the doors, the ones Tae-sung had contacted the moment they'd secured the evidence, the ones who'd been building a case and just needed proof. Ruth watched them take Brian away in handcuffs, watched the mayor try to flee and fail, watched the entire corrupt infrastructure collapse like a house of cards. And she felt nothing but cold, perfect satisfaction. Tae-sung's arm slid around her waist. Time to go home. Home, the fortress of glass where she was prisoner and queen both. Ruth leaned into him and smiled. "Yes. Let's go home." The news broke at dawn. Brian Martinez, arrested on charges of money laundering, racketeering, and corruption, had disappeared during transport to federal holding. The armored vehicle had been found abandoned on a rural highway, its 2 guards unconscious, no sign of the prisoner. Ruth read the headline on her tablet while standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom, the fortress of glass that had become her kingdom. Behind her, she felt Tae-sung's presence before his arms circled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Did you—" she started to ask. "The feds have him in a black site 3 states away," Tae-sung murmured against her ear, "cooperating fully, giving them names, locations, everything. But as far as the world knows, he vanished. No trial, no platform, no chance for his people to regroup around him." Ruth should have felt something, guilt, maybe, or fear of the power she now wielded. Instead, she felt only that cold, crystalline clarity that had become her constant companion. And the others? Running, hiding, turning on each other. His arms tightened around her. "The mayor resigned this morning. 3 councilmen have already fled the city. The police chief is under investigation. The whole corrupt network is eating itself alive." She watched the city wake below them, thousands of people starting their days, unaware that the woman who'd exposed their leader's sins was standing above them like a dark angel. "Your brother called," Tae-sung said softly. "He wants to see you. Make sure you're okay." Ruth's smile was small but real. Julian had believed her in the end, had watched the gala broadcast and called crying, apologizing for doubting her. Some bridges could be rebuilt. "What about us?" She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become a monster so she could learn to be a queen. "The feds know you helped. They know about your organization." Tae-sung's smile was all edges. "They also know I handed them the biggest corruption case in the city's history, and they know I have copies of everything. Insurance, Ruth, just like Brian taught us." His hand came up, cupping her face with that devastating gentleness. "We're untouchable now, too valuable to prosecute, too dangerous to ignore." "So we just rule?" The word felt foreign on her tongue, tempting. We protect what's ours, he corrected her, but they both knew it was the same thing. The Black Book didn't die with Brian's arrest. We kept the copies. Every politician, every businessman, every person who profited from suffering, they all know we have their secrets now. Ruth thought about the girl on the swing set, believing in promises, about the woman who'd hid in basements and married monsters, about the queen who'd burned down an empire at a gala while wearing red. "I'm not the same person who sent that text," she said quietly. "No," Taesung's forehead pressed against hers. "You're better, stronger. You're exactly who you were always meant to become. I just gave you the fortress to do it in." "And what about the boy who promised to protect me?" Ruth's hands slid up his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Is he still in there somewhere?" "He never left." His lips brushed hers, soft and claiming at once. "He's just learned that sometimes protection looks like teaching you to hold the knife yourself." Below them, the city moved on. Above them, the sky lightened. And between them, something settled. Not peace exactly, but understanding. They were two people who'd survived by becoming dangerous, who'd found each other in the wreckage and built an empire from the ruins. Ruth pulled back, looking at the man who'd kept a teddy bear for 15 years, who'd answered a desperate text from a dead number, who'd turned her from prey into predator. "Teach me more," she said, and her smile was all teeth and hunger. "Teach me how to rule this city the way you do, as partners, as equals." Taesung's answering smile could have lit the darkness on fire. "That's my queen," he murmured, and kissed her like a vow sealed in blood and glass and 15 years of waiting. In the fortress they'd built together, Ruth Martinez finally came home. Not to safety, she'd learned that safety was an illusion, but to power, to choice, to the freedom that came from being dangerous enough that no one would ever dare to cage her again. The city below them didn't know that its new rulers were standing at the window, watching, waiting, ready to burn down anyone who threatened what was theirs.
You know what's funny about survival? The people who force you into a corner never see what's coming. They think they're winning while you're on your knees. They think your silence means surrender. But what they don't understand is that every blow, every humiliation, every moment they make you feel powerless, it's all just fuel. And one day, that fuel ignites. Ruth sent a text to a dead number from a basement floor, believing she had nothing left. What she didn't know was that she had everything: rage, intelligence, and a man who'd spent 15 years sharpening himself into a weapon just for her. She thought she was asking for rescue. What she got was a mirror showing her who she could become. Here's the thing about transformation. It's never clean. You don't go from victim to victor without getting blood under your fingernails. You don't learn to wield power without first understanding what it costs. And sometimes the person staring back at you when it's over is a stranger wearing your face, harder, colder, more dangerous than you ever imagined you could be. But you're breathing, you're free. And maybe that stranger is who you needed to become all along. So let me ask you this. If you were Ruth, standing in that basement with Brian coming down the stairs, would you have sent that text? Would you have trusted a 15-year-old promise from a boy who became a monster? Or would you have faced Brian alone, believing you could survive without becoming something darker yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know, would you choose the fortress of glass, or would you find another way out? This is what we do here at Silent Speaks Story.
We don't tell fairy tales where the prince saves the princess and everyone lives happily ever after. We tell the truth, that survival is messy, freedom is earned in blood and choices you can't undo, and sometimes the only way out is through the fire. If you felt every word of Ruth's journey in your bones, that subscribe button is waiting for you. Every week, I bring you stories about people who refuse to break, who find strength in the darkest places, who discover that power isn't given, it's taken. These are stories about what happens when you stop asking for permission and start taking what's yours. No heroes, no villains, just people pushed to the edge, deciding whether to fall or fly. See you next time. And remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Copyright Silent Speaks Story, where every story leaves a mark.